The black town car glided through Ottawa's morning mist, its tires whispering against wet pavement. Inside, Prime Minister Mark Carney sat motionless, his reflection fragmenting across raindrops on tinted windows. His face, composed, unreadable, betrayed nothing of the storm brewing inside. 2 minutes, sir, his driver announced. Carney nodded, straightening his navy tie. The CBC studio waited ahead, lights already blazing despite the early hour. Today's interview had been 6 months in planning, though the world believed it arranged just last week. Nothing about this morning was spontaneous. Nothing was left to chance. Before we continue with the story, let us know in the comments where in Canada you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue with the story. On his secure tablet, he scanned the final intelligence brief. One last time. Confirmation had arrived at 3:17 a.m. The Mackenzie Valley purchase attempt, the Arctic shipping corridor proposal, the integration memorandum, all verified. He closed his eyes briefly, centering himself, former governor of the Bank of England, former Goldman Sachs, managing director, current Prime Minister of Canada. Each role had prepared him for today's confrontation, though none had ever presented stakes quite so existential. Sometimes you must choose between what is popular and what is right, he whispered, his father's old refrain. A faint smile touched his lips. When the car door opened, Carney stepped into the chill Canadian dawn, unflinching. Later, analysts would parse every frame of this moment, how his shoulders set, how his eyes seemed to calculate something beyond the visible horizon, how he entered the building not as a man facing crisis, but as one precisely where he needed to be. This was no ordinary media appearance. Today, Mark Carney would draw a line that would alter the geopolitical map. Canada, under his watch, would not be sold. 90 seconds to air, Prime Minister. The studio buzzed with the controlled chaos of pre-broadcast preparations. Lighting technicians made final adjustments while producers spoke rapidly into headsets. At the center of it all, seated beneath the harsh studio lights, Carney remained still. Across from him, the empty chair waited. Sophie Chen, Carney's chief of staff, approached with a tablet showing the morning's trending topics. It's already leaking. Bloomberg is running with unprecedented confrontation expected, as their headline, she said quietly. The Musk camp has been pushing the narrative that you requested this interview as damage control. Carney took a slow sip of water. Sophie's eyes narrowed. They're calling it desperate, saying you're trying to get ahead of economic numbers. The numbers released yesterday were strong. Yes, but perception is a battlefield we're prepared for. Carney handed back the tablet. Has our guest arrived? Sophie nodded. Just entered the building. He brought 3 people, not the agreed upon 2. Of course he did. Carney smoothed his jacket. And the package from CSIS? On your secure tablet. Full verification on all documents. Good. He glanced at the empty chair again. Sophie, after this, regardless of outcome, implement Boreal protocol. Her eyes widened slightly. That's decisive. It's necessary. His voice remained soft but carried absolute certainty. We won't get another opportunity. The studio doors opened. The air changed, charged suddenly with the particular electricity that follows wealth and power. Elon Musk strode in, entourage trailing behind him, tall with the casual confidence of a man unaccustomed to barriers. Black t-shirt under an expensive jacket, the uniform of tech disruptors who presented as revolutionaries while amassing more wealth than the robber barons of old. Carney rose. The 2 men shook hands. Camera flashes captured the moment, the composed prime minister and the mercurial billionaire, locking eyes across the narrow divide of a broadcast table. Prime Minister, quite the dramatic invitation. Musk's smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I suppose when your northern territories are bleeding population and investment capital, you need headline-grabbing moments. Carney smiled back, equally hollow. Mr. Musk. Still a Canadian citizen when it's advantageous for mineral rights negotiations, I see. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, or respect, crossed Musk's face. He took his seat, adjusting his microphone with the casual ease of someone who had spent a lifetime adapting to cameras. 30 seconds, called the director. Sophie retreated from the set, giving Carney one last glance, a subtle nod conveying both support and concern. The studio lights intensified. The bustling crew fell silent. Gentlemen, the moderator began, settling into her chair, we're about to broadcast live across North America and globally. Is there anything you need before we begin? I'm ready, Musk said, leaning back with practiced nonchalance. Carney simply nodded once, his eyes never leaving his opponent. 10 seconds. In the control room, technicians watched their monitors as ratings began spiking. Social media metrics were already exploding. Speculation, memes, hot takes forming before a single word had been broadcast. 5, 4, Carney inhaled slowly. He had spent months preparing for this moment. The intelligence was solid. The strategy was sound. Behind his calm exterior, his mind was orchestrating moves and counter-moves, a geostrategic chess game where Canada's sovereignty itself was in play. 3, 2, the red light blinked on. 1. Good morning, and welcome to this special broadcast. The moderator, Ellen Dawson, spoke directly to the camera with practiced precision. I'm Ellen Dawson, and today we're joined by Prime Minister Mark Carney and entrepreneur Elon Musk for what promises to be a candid discussion about Canada's economic future, technological innovation, and the relationship between government and private enterprise. Carney watched Musk's body language, the slight forward lean, the barely contained energy. A man used to controlling narratives, not responding to them. Mr. Musk, as CEO of multiple companies investing in Canada's mineral sector and as a Canadian-born citizen yourself, you've recently made statements about what you've called the inevitable economic integration of North America. Would you care to elaborate? Musk smiled, that characteristic half-smile that appeared both earnest and calculating. Look, I'm simply acknowledging reality. Borders are increasingly irrelevant in a digital age. Capital flows where opportunity exists. Canada has abundant natural resources, but lacks the investment infrastructure to develop them at scale. He gestured expressively. What I'm proposing is a rational approach to continental integration that benefits everyone. The Northern Corridor Initiative would create millions of jobs, revolutionize Arctic shipping, and yes, make a lot of money for investors, Canadian investors included. Ellen nodded. Prime Minister Carney, your response? Carney leaned forward slightly, his voice measured and precise. Economic integration is nothing new, Mr. Musk. NAFTA, now USMCA. These frameworks have governed North American trade for decades. What's new is your particular vision of integration, which seems less about partnership and more about acquisition. He tapped his finger once on the table. When you speak about the inevitable dissolution of economic boundaries, you're not describing natural market forces. You're describing a targeted campaign to devalue Canadian sovereignty in service of resource extraction. Musk laughed, though his eyes remained sharp. That's an interesting interpretation, Prime Minister. I'd call it economic reality. When capital and talent flow freely, artificial constraints like national regulations become expensive inefficiencies. Regulations like environmental protections, labor laws, tax codes. Carney kept his tone conversational, though precisely pointed. Exactly, Musk leaned forward. Canada's regulatory framework is driving away the very investment it needs. Your government's restrictions on northern development alone cost the economy billions annually. Our government's protections ensure those resources benefit Canadians for generations, not merely shareholders for quarters. The back and forth continued, seemingly cordial but increasingly tense. Ellen attempted to steer toward broader topics, climate initiatives, tech regulation, international trade, but the underlying current remained two fundamentally opposed visions for Canada's future. 30 minutes in, during a discussion of Arctic sovereignty, Musk delivered what he clearly intended as a knockout blow. With respect, Prime Minister, your administration seems determined to cast wealth creation as something sinister. Meanwhile, your northern territories face unprecedented economic challenges. The Northwest Passage will open with or without Canada's participation. The question is whether Canadians will profit or watch from the sidelines while Chinese and American interests develop what you won't. He produced his phone, glancing at it casually. In fact, I've just received word that our consortium's proposal for the Mackenzie Valley has received preliminary support from 3 provincial premiers and 12 Indigenous band councils. They recognize what Ottawa refuses to. The future waits for no one. The studio fell momentarily silent. Ellen looked to Carney, clearly expecting defensiveness or perhaps anger. Instead, the Prime Minister smiled. How interesting, he said quietly, that you've received this notification during our broadcast. Almost as if it were choreographed for dramatic effect. He reached for his water glass. Tell me, Mr. Musk, Does your consortium include Silver Arctic Holdings? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Musk's face, so brief most viewers would miss it. They're one of many potential partners, yes. And Meridian Infrastructure Capital, again, one of many institutional investors expressing interest. Carney nodded. And are you aware that both are shell corporations registered in Delaware, ultimately controlled by your family office through a series of offshore arrangements in Cyprus and Singapore? Musk's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I have hundreds of investments. The specific corporate structures are designed to create the illusion of broad support while obscuring that you're effectively negotiating with yourself. Carney finished, his voice still conversational. A technique you've employed previously in lithium acquisition deals in Argentina and cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Elon tried to interject. Prime Minister, these are significant allegations. Not allegations, Carney corrected gently. Documented facts. My office would be happy to provide the corporate registration documents, banking transfers, and communications records that establish this pattern. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. Musk's casual confidence was giving way to something cooler, more calculating. You've been busy, Musk said, his tone darkening. Investigating private business affairs rather than addressing Canada's economic stagnation. On the contrary, Carney replied. Protecting Canada's economic sovereignty is precisely my responsibility. Which brings us to the proposed Mackenzie Valley development. He opened a folder that had sat untouched on the table. The 12 Indigenous councils you mentioned, I find it curious that their support comes before the environmental impact assessment that Canadian law requires, particularly since our records show that only 4 councils have held any formal vote on the matter. Musk shifted in his seat. The preliminary discussions were conducted through proxy corporations, offering what internal documents describe as incentive packages, conditional on bypassing federal regulatory frameworks. Carney slid a document across the table. Would you like to comment on this memo, dated 3 weeks ago, outlining strategies to, and I quote, accelerate Canadian regulatory capture through strategic provincial alignment? Elon glanced nervously between them. We'll need to take a brief break. When we return, actually, Musk interrupted, his voice hardening. I'd like to address this directly. Prime Minister Carney seems determined to paint standard business development as some kind of conspiracy. He leaned forward. The reality is this. Canada cannot afford its current path. Your dollar is weakening. Your brightest minds continue moving south. Your resource wealth remains largely untapped due to bureaucratic paralysis, masquerading as environmental concern. His voice gained intensity. What you call sovereignty protection, the world calls protectionism. What you frame as foreign interference is simply global market efficiency. The Northern Corridor will be built, if not by Canadians, then despite them. Carney listened without interruption, his expression unchanged. Are you finished? He asked, when Musk paused. For now, Musk's smile returned, though colder. Then we'll take that break, Elon said quickly. 5 minutes, gentlemen. As the red light blinked off, studio staff rushed in with water and makeup, touch-ups. Musk immediately turned to his aides, speaking rapidly in hushed tones. One was already on a phone, stepping away from the set. Sophie appeared at Carney's side. The CSIS package is ready, she whispered. Fully authenticated. Defense is on standby. Carney nodded once, and the legislative order? Prepared exactly as specified. Good. He took a sip of water. When we return, implement Protocol 7. Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Full disclosure, Carney confirmed. The time for measured responses has passed. In the cramped confines of the CBC control room, 12 screens displayed the unfolding drama from different angles. Producers watched as viewership metrics climbed exponentially. The hashtag Young Carney vs. Musk was trending globally. Financial news tickers reported sudden volatility in Canadian resource stocks. We're back in 60 seconds, the director announced. On the main monitor, Carney sat motionless while Musk conferred urgently with an aide. The billionaire's expression had changed, the casual confidence replaced by tight-lipped calculation. Outside the studio, the digital world was erupting. Speculation about what Carney might reveal next sent ripples through markets. Defense analysts noted unusual activity from military communications satellites, repositioning over Canadian Arctic territories, a subtle but unmistakable message from Ottawa. 30 seconds. On the set, Musk returned to his seat. He leaned toward Carney, microphone still off. I underestimated you, Prime Minister. Carney met his gaze. Most do. 10 seconds. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Musk suggested, his voice low. Some matters aren't suited for public consumption. 5, 4. I couldn't agree more, Carney replied. Some matters require absolute transparency. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. The world watched. Welcome back to our special broadcast, Ellen began, tension evident in her voice. Before the break, we were discussing proposed developments in Canada's north and questions of economic sovereignty. She turned to Musk. Mr. Musk, you suggested that Prime Minister Carney's concerns about foreign investment represent protectionism. Would you care to elaborate? Musk had regained his composure. His smile returned, though his eyes remained vigilant. Gladly. Throughout history, nations have often retreated behind sovereignty claims when facing economic challenges. Canada's current administration is no different. Rather than embracing innovation and investment, they've constructed a narrative about foreign interference to justify maintaining inefficient control. He gestured broadly. The truth is simpler. Global capital seeks return. It doesn't recognize borders. When Canada places artificial barriers, whether regulatory, environmental, or nationalistic, that capital simply flows elsewhere. The result? Canadian resources remain undeveloped. Canadian workers lose opportunities. Canadian citizens pay the price for Ottawa's pride. Ellen nodded. Prime Minister Carney, your response? Carney leaned forward slightly. The studio lights caught the perfect stillness of his expression. Mr. Musk presents a convenient worldview, where capital is stateless and regulations are merely obstacles to efficiency. His voice remained calm, measured, but this framing deliberately obscures the nature of what's actually happening. He opened a folder. 3 months ago, a private investment entity called Arctic Frontier Ventures began acquiring land rights throughout the Northwest Territories. Their public mission statement promotes sustainable development and local empowerment. Musk's expression remained neutral. What wasn't public, Carney continued, was that AFV is majority controlled by a network of shell companies, ultimately leading back to Tech Future Holdings, which you established in 2021 as your personal acquisition vehicle. He slid a document across the table. This organizational chart maps the ownership structure. 27 separate entities across 12 jurisdictions, all designed to obscure that these Canadian resource acquisitions ultimately trace back to a single controlling interest, yours. Musk glanced at the paper. Complex corporate structures are standard practice in global investment. There's nothing illegal. I haven't suggested illegality, Carney interrupted gently. I'm addressing transparency. Canadian citizens deserve to know when a single foreign actor attempts to acquire controlling interest in strategic northern resources. Foreign actor? Musk's eyebrows raised. I was born in Canada. Yes, a convenient dual citizenship you've maintained despite building your companies and fortune primarily in the United States. Carney's tone remained conversational. A citizenship you referenced repeatedly in private meetings with provincial officials while emphasizing your Canadian roots and commitment to Canada's future. Musk shrugged. I fail to see the problem. Many successful Canadians maintain dual citizenship. Indeed, but most don't simultaneously lobby provincial governments while working to undermine federal authority. Carney removed another document from his folder. This internal strategy memo from your team outlines a 3-phase approach to what you call regulatory realignment. Phase 1 involves creating internal provincial pressure against federal oversight. Phase 2 describes using economic leverage to fragment Canadian policy consensus. Phase 3 explicitly mentions sovereignty erosion as a desirable outcome. Ellen's eyes widened. Mr. Musk, these are serious. These are standard business documents taken out of context, Musk interrupted, his casual demeanor slipping. Corporate strategy uses direct language that can seem dramatic when quoted selectively. Perhaps this requires additional context then, Carney replied. He removed a final document. This is a transcript of your address to the Northern Freedom Investment Forum in Zurich last month. A closed-door gathering of resource investors, you stated, and I quote directly, the Canadian federal government is fundamentally an artificial constraint on North American resource development. Our strategy is to systematically reduce Ottawa's practical authority through provincial alignments and strategic infrastructure control until sovereignty becomes largely symbolic. The studio fell silent. Ellen looked between the two men, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Musk's expression hardened. Private investment discussions require frank assessment of political realities. You've taken a strategic analysis and framed it as some sort of conspiracy. I've simply quoted your words, Carney replied. Words that reveal the true nature of what you describe as mere investment. A coordinated campaign to undermine Canadian sovereignty for private profit. He closed the folder. But perhaps most concerning is what you didn't mention publicly. Project Polaris. For the first time, Musk betrayed real surprise. His eyes narrowed. I'm not familiar with Project Polaris, Carney continued. Your initiative to establish privately controlled economic development zones in Canada's Arctic with regulatory frameworks distinct from Canadian law. Zones that would operate under what your proposal describes as alternative sovereignty frameworks with private security forces and corporate governance structures. He leaned forward. In essence, corporate colonies on Canadian soil. Musk's face hardened into a mask of careful control. The calculated charm disappeared entirely. Prime Minister, you seem determined to frame forward-thinking economic development as something sinister. Special economic zones exist worldwide. The concept of charter cities has proven successful in multiple jurisdictions. What you call colonies, economists call innovation hubs. When designed transparently and with democratic oversight, perhaps, Carney acknowledged. But your proposal explicitly seeks to circumvent Canadian sovereignty, to create what amounts to foreign territories within our borders. The future doesn't conform to 19th century conceptions of statehood, Musk countered, his voice sharpening. Nations that cling to outdated sovereignty models will simply be left behind. Capital, talent, and innovation flow where they're welcomed, not where they're regulated, into submission. His eyes locked with Carney's. Canada can participate in this future or resist it, but resistance merely ensures you'll watch from the sidelines as others lead. Ellen attempted to regain control of the conversation. This raises important questions about the balance between investment and sovereignty. Perhaps we should. With respect, Ellen, Carney interjected gently. This raises much more fundamental questions about Canada's future. He turned back to Musk. You've framed this as a choice between embracing your vision or being left behind. This false dichotomy ignores a crucial third option. Canada charting its own course, developing its resources according to Canadian values, and for the benefit of Canadian citizens. He sat straighter. Which brings us to the reason I requested this conversation. Something in his tone caused the studio to still. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Mr. Musk, after careful review of your activities, targeting Canadian resources and sovereignty, and in light of evidence that you have worked systematically to undermine our national interests, I am announcing 3 actions effective immediately. Musk's expression froze. First, by executive order, all land acquisitions, resource permits, and development proposals connected to your network of companies are suspended pending a national security review. The billionaire started to speak, but Carney continued without pause. Second, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has been directed to open a formal investigation into foreign interference operations, targeting Canadian resource governance, including the coordinated provincial lobbying campaign documented in these materials. He placed his hand on the folder. And third, given your explicit statements regarding the dismantling of Canadian sovereignty and your active work toward that objective, I have signed an order revoking your Canadian citizenship, effective immediately. The studio fell completely silent. Ellen stared, momentarily speechless. Musk's face showed genuine shock, perhaps the first unfiltered emotion he displayed since entering the studio. You can't do that, he said finally, voice low. I can and have, Carney replied simply. Canadian citizenship is not a convenience to be leveraged when economically advantageous. It carries responsibilities, including a basic loyalty to the nation itself. A loyalty your own words and actions have explicitly rejected. He leaned forward slightly. Let me be absolutely clear. Canada welcomes investment, innovation, and partnership. What we will not accept is colonization disguised as development. The North is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Ellen finally found her voice. Prime Minister, this is unprecedented. Revoking citizenship is an extraordinary step. Extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary responses, Carney replied. When a dual citizen explicitly works to undermine Canadian sovereignty while using that citizenship to facilitate resource acquisition, the response must be decisive. Musk had recovered his composure, though his eyes remained cold. This will have consequences, Prime Minister. Global markets won't react kindly to this kind of nationalistic posturing. I'm quite familiar with how markets react, Mr. Musk, Carney replied, his tone remaining measured. Before entering politics, I spent my career in global finance and central banking. Markets respond to clarity and consistency, both of which Canada is providing today. He straightened slightly. As for consequences, Canada has faced pressure before. We've withstood it then. We'll withstand it now. Elon looked between them. Mr. Musk, would you care to respond to these announcements? The billionaire's face was a careful mask now, all pretense of casual charm gone. Only that Prime Minister Carney has made a dramatic miscalculation. The global investment community will take note that Canada has become hostile to capital. The innovation economy requires freedom, not nationalist restrictions. He leaned forward. You've chosen isolation dressed up as sovereignty protection. History won't judge this kindly. On the contrary, Carney replied, history recognizes the difference between genuine partnership and attempted conquest, even when that conquest comes through spreadsheets rather than armies. He addressed the camera directly now, speaking to the millions watching worldwide. To the global community, Canada remains enthusiastically open to partnership, investment, and collaboration. What has ended today is not opportunity, but exploitation. Not development, but extraction. Not development, but extraction. Not partnership, but predation. His voice remained calm, but carried absolute conviction. The North is not for sale. Canada's sovereignty is not negotiable. Our resources will be developed, but on terms that benefit Canadians first and for generations to come. Elon, recognizing the historic nature of the moment, wisely remained silent. Musk's expression had hardened into something approaching respect, though tinged with cold calculation. Bold words, Prime Minister. The market will determine whether they're wise ones. Indeed it will, Carney agreed, as will the Canadian people, who deserve to know the truth about what was being attempted in their name. The red light blinked. Elon announced they would take another brief break. As cameras temporarily stopped rolling, Musk leaned across the table. You've made an enemy today, he said quietly. Carney met his gaze without flinching. I've simply enforced the law and protected my country. If that makes us adversaries, so be it. The third segment of the interview never happened. Musk's team announced he was departing immediately, citing urgent business matters. The abrupt exit itself became news, splashed across screens worldwide. Musk retreats after Carney revokes citizenship. Financial analysts scrambled to assess implications. Political commentators debated the precedent. Legal experts parsed the citizenship revocation, rare but clearly within prime ministerial authority, in cases involving national security. Inside his office at Parliament, Carney stood by the window overlooking Ottawa. Sophie entered with a tablet displaying initial reaction metrics. Markets are volatile but not panicking, she reported. The TSX dipped initially, but is already rebounding. Your decision to simultaneously announce the Northern Development Framework is stabilizing investor sentiment. Carney nodded. An international response, mixed, as expected. Washington is officially concerned and monitoring, but Secretary Warren called privately to express tacit support. European Union has issued a statement supporting Canada's sovereign right to protect strategic resources. Beijing is predictably critical. And domestic? Sophie smiled for the first time. Overwhelmingly positive. 84% support in initial polling. Even traditional critics are calling it a watershed moment for Canadian sovereignty. Carney turned from the window. We've bought time, Sophie, not victory. He won't retaliate quietly, she acknowledged. No, he's already mobilizing resources. His companies will divest Canadian holdings. Friendly media outlets will frame this as economic suicide. There will be pressure from Washington, coordinated market movements, attempts to sow provincial discord. He moved to his desk, where a single document waited, the Northern Sovereignty Protection Act. Not yet public, not yet law, but the next logical step. We knew this confrontation was inevitable, he said quietly. Canada's resource wealth is too vast, our protections too meaningful, our sovereignty too inconvenient to those who see nations as merely obstacles to acquisition. Sophie watched him carefully. The citizenship revocation was the right move. It exposed his true intentions. It was necessary, Carney agreed. But only the beginning. His phone chimed with a secure message. The cabinet was assembled, waiting for his briefing on next steps. World leaders were requesting calls. The machinery of governance never paused. What he doesn't understand, Carney said, almost to himself, is that nations aren't merely economic entities. They're expressions of collective will, of shared values, of democratic choice. When people decide their future matters more than quarterly profits, no amount of capital can overcome that resolve. He picked up the document, scheduled a national address for 8 tonight. The Canadian people deserve to hear directly what comes next. Sophie nodded. And Musk? We'll learn what my predecessors at the Bank of England taught me long ago. Carney smiled slightly. Markets can be powerful, but sovereignty, real sovereignty, backed by democratic will, is infinitely more so. He moved toward the door where his cabinet waited. There would be battles ahead, legal challenges, economic pressure, coordinated media campaigns, questioning his judgment. The full weight of private capital would align against this reassertion of national purpose. But Mark Carney walked with the quiet confidence of a man who had calculated the odds and chosen his ground perfectly. Canada would emerge stronger. The North would remain Canadian. And the world would be reminded that nations, even in the age of borderless capital, still mattered. As he reached the door, he paused briefly, remembering his father's words once more. Sometimes you must choose between what is popular and what is right. Today, for Canada, they were one and the same.